All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to a rapidly appearing pop-up episode of the Gunner Technology Livestream. Cody, why don't you start us off by talking through what are the differences between an RFP, an RFQ, and an RFI as far as the government bidding process goes?
Yeah, so today we're going to be looking at an RFI, and we're just going to kind of go through this live so you can kind of see how this works. And an RFI is a request for information. And basically what an RFI is doing is they are soliciting information. A government agency is soliciting information in order to either improve or create an RFP. So a lot of times there's not a lot of technical backing or technical knowledge at some of these agencies. And so they know they want something, but they don't know how to ask for it. And so these RFIs are unpaid, by the way. When you answer these RFIs, you're not getting paid. You're basically just offering your services to these government agencies to help them create or modify or change an RFP or an RFQ. RFP is request for proposal. And so basically, the RFP has a lot of stuff into it, a lot of stuff in it, including like how to submit your actual bid and the legal ramifications of submitting a bid, and a lot of cruff that you and I kind of put off on on other people in the company to make sure that it's okay. What you and I are interested in RFP is the technical specifications, the technical requirements, and things like that. And so what that'll be is like explain to us what technologies you use, what specific approach would you take to this problem, how long would it take, what is your team going to be, what is your team's experience. Some of them ask you to submit mocks and sometimes prototypes. And that's when you're really trying to actually get the bid. RFQ is just a request for quote. So it's almost always in addition to an RFP, but it's like an RFP with a dollar amount assigned to it.
Just to get a sense of the price. They're interested in how much it's going to cost.
That's exactly right. And usually you have to submit these separately because you have to submit them separately, usually because they're supposed to evaluate them separately. They're supposed to evaluate the price and the technical proposal separately, so they're not influenced in judging the technical proposal by the actual price that's submitted on it. So agency evaluators may have a bias if they see something is $80,000 and the rest of them are $800,000. They may be like, well, this technical proposal is looking pretty good, but really what they're attracted to is the price kind of thing. So they're asked to evaluate those separately, and then the contract is awarded based on the evaluation of the bid and then the bid price, which are supposed to be kept separately.
Gotcha. And actually, this is the first time we're doing an RFI live stream. So interesting technical issue is we're streaming to OBS from the Google Hangout window. So when I screen share, it doesn't actually show up in OBS. So your face was frozen in the most comical position on Facebook and Periscope for a solid like 5 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is actually
the best of us.
What
you want me to share my screen?
No. I'm just going to paste the questions in chat on the right, which people can see on the live stream.
Okay.
And then we'll go through stuff there.
And I think you should also point out that we go through a lot of these, and this is the first time we've done this on a live stream, and we haven't looked at this yet. We're going to take this exactly like we would a normal RFI, and we're going to go through it, and we're going to figure it out on the fly. I mean, we're going to treat this as real as any other RFI. We haven't prepped this beforehand, so if there's a lot of thinking and dead air, it's because we're actually we're treating this as we would any other real RFI that we're seeing for the first time.
Bill O'Reilly would be proud. We are actually doing this live.
Yes.
Company name, Gunner Technology, Inc. Company email address, contact@gunnertech.com. Are you interested in receiving emails from 18F. Did you talk about 18F? I was checking audio, so I'm not sure.
No,
if
I didn't.
that's who they are.
Okay, so this RFI is in conjunction with 18F Acquisitions and the Forest Service, and so basically, what 18F Acquisitions is, it's a company that assists the government in writing RFPs. So this is not uncommon at all, and so basically, what this RFI is 18F representing the Forest Service, putting together an original RFP for the Forest Service, and then they're looking to get feedback. 18F is looking to get feedback from potential bidders on this RFP that they put together. And additionally, they have some survey questions as well.
So their first question was whether we're interested in receiving emails when there are significant updates or changes to the solicitation. I would say definitely for that.
Yes, yes.
Is the formatting okay?
Let me
looks
see.
okay on the Facebook screen. Folks in chat, if it's no good, just let us know if you guys can't read it or if you need us to do a different way. But the next question was, provide up to 3 website examples in open source repos and talk about how they demonstrate your accomplishments in human-centered design, user research, user interface design, API design, and/or front back-end development.
Well, that's a big one. And that's going to take, so let me just go through and at least talk what they're talking about. We don't have to actually answer this. I don't think we'd have time to answer this whole question unless we want to take like 3 hours. So 3 website examples, that's pretty cut and dry. Open source repos. So this is kind of weird. I don't understand this, and you see this a lot. They want examples of open source repos, but why would we be doing open source work for clients or agencies? So what we have to do here is we have to like go to our clients and ask them if we can put their code on an open source repo, so that it can be evaluated by another for another project, which is always dicey. I don't understand this requirement at all. It'd make a lot more sense if they just asked for a copy of the code.
Yeah, I think you're actually kind of hard pressed to find websites that have open source repos. To have a live website with an open source repo seems,
and that's weird. I may say we even push back on that and offer to send them a zip file of the code, because this just doesn't. We're not writing open source applications here. We're not writing open source websites. We're writing websites and web apps for agencies and clients that don't want their code shared. They want it private.
Maybe those are separate things. Maybe it's 3 websites and 3 open source repos. But okay, that would make no sense, because that would I guess it would relate to API design. We have open source repos that related to API design, but even that's kind of weird. I would push back and just ask them if we can zip the code up and send it to them.
Yeah, but I mean, so human-centered design, that's the concept of basically, and it's weird because we've never done it in my, how long have we been doing this? A long time. Ever since I started doing this, I've never used anything other than human-centered design. We have talked about this ad nauseum. It's so foolhardily to plow forward and assume that you know what's best based on your idea or your history or whatnot. Human-centered design is basically the concept that you design the app, and not just like a graphical design or a user interface, but actually the functionality of the app every step of the way. So you develop a piece of functionality one week, you get feedback on it the next week, and then the third week you tweak the functionality or design based on that feedback, and you basically get everyone involved in the process of determining the feature set and the UI and whatnot.
I mean, it's really just an outgrowth of us using Agile basically the entire time we've been coding.
That's right.
It's more or less like inherent to the Agile process that you're going to do human-centered design.
That's right. And actually, this is one of the things that bugs me about my industry is we come up with cutesy names for everything. All this is collaborative work. That's all this
Right.
is. It's
Right.
all
Yeah.
you get people involved, and it's not like a dictatorship, but it's more about like feedback, and you use collaborative feedback to dictate the direction of the application rather than just someone's dogma kind of thing.
You can't sell feedback though. You can sell human-centered design. That sounds fancy and
That's right. That's right.
um, yeah, so
So,
that's no problem to send their way.
yeah. So user research again is again, like for me, it's one and the same with human-centered design. You're using user research to do human-centered design. So you internally or in a beta format release functionality or UI changes or whatnot. You do user research based on focus groups, based on, we talked about this in our last episode, you do data collection, because you can actually, a lot of times the data tells a better story about what the users want than the users themselves want. So you can tell using data packages and like Google Analytics and things like that, where the pain points are in the design or functionality of the app. So you collect that research, both qualitative and quantitative, and then you use that again iteratively to improve the design and functionality of the application.
And it's really easy to convert that feedback into actionable items. So, somebody might say, it's really annoying that I can only see, 3 orders on this page. And then you can turn that into a story that says, as a user, I want to see the most recent 25 orders that I've placed. And then you can implement that during the next iteration or however you break your work up.
Exactly. That's a great example. So user interface design. So like, this is weird because sometimes, again, I feel like someone finds a bucket of terms and just kind of drops it, because we're in my mind, we're talking about the same thing. Again, user interface design is part of human-centered design.
Yeah.
And so again, this is to the point we just said. If you're designing a user interface, and Gunner Technology is much functional than, what's the opposite of functional? I don't even know what the opposite of functional is. Like, we're much
non-functional.
more, yeah, non-functional. So we're much more goal-oriented in that a user interface should accomplish a goal. It shouldn't be there to look pretty. If those two happen to coincide, great. But the main purpose of a UI is to allow the users to quickly and easily complete a task. So you can measure things like this, like how long is it taking someone to find a button? You can calculate these things, again, both qualitatively and quantitatively. You can have, again, a focus group where you like kind of look over the user's shoulder, and when they stop, you can say, what are you trying to do right now? And they can say, well, I'm looking for the button to go to the next screen. And it's like, well, there actually is no next screen. So then you have a user interface problem, because they're looking for the next button and they're actually already done, and they just don't know they're done. So again, that's part of the human-centered design. I don't know why they broke that out, but it's kind of one and the same for me.
It's actually, like, I would almost say user interface design plus user research equals human-centered design almost.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
API design, I'm not sure what exactly they're looking for there, but I mean, we have a ton of examples we can send them for API design as far as JSON APIs we built out.
Yeah, I mean, so again, for the people listening, an API is basically just a way for one machine, one piece of software, to talk to another piece of software. So for example, if Twitter is a system, right? And if we wrote an application that made stock picks based on how many times Donald Trump tweeted. So let's say if he tweets 10 times or less in a day, we're selling our portfolio. If he tweets more than 10 times a day, we're doubling down on our portfolio. Well, Twitter has this API, which is basically like, how can my application figure out if Donald Trump has tweeted 10 or more times today? And then Yahoo Finance, actually Yahoo Finance is probably a bad example. E-Trade has another API where we can tell it from our application, hey, double up on our buys in our portfolio, or sell our entire portfolio. So an API design is just designing the most efficient way to communicate between systems with no human intervention. And again, for me, that goes under human-centered design as well. As you know, we're in the process of kind of fleshing out a pretty elaborate API design. And it's all about kind of iteratively getting to what these people want, because we're dealing with non-technical people who don't say, well, I want this machine to know this. They don't know. They have no idea what an API even is. So it's an iterative process to, okay, now our API can do this. And they're like, all right, great, but how does it do that? I'm like, well, we haven't built that into our API. Okay, well, our API needs to do that. Okay, well, we iterate on it and then we build that functionality into our API.
And that, I mean, those 4 things cover the last point, which is basically front-end development is basically covered by human-centered design, which covers user research and user interface design. API design is a large chunk of the back-end development. So I guess the only thing left would be
well, I think
back-end actually interacts with the front end that we design.
Yeah, actually, I think it's worth talking about right there, because and again, we're doing this pop-up episode so quickly after our regular episode, but we talked about React Native and React and AWS in the last episode. One thing that AWS does really, really well, and actually we just published a 10-part series on this, is getting mobile applications launched with a front end and a back end. And so this back end is largely the API, and it's what we talked about. We use something called Mobile Hub on AWS, which is a combination package that makes front end and back end development very easy. It uses Lambda, it uses API Gateway, and it uses DynamoDB to build the back end. Again, completely serverless, so you can scale from 0 to a bajillion with no extra effort, no increase or no decrease in performance. It happens automatically. And the front end, they actually configure for you and have a front end, which is what you actually see. The front end is, again, what's downloaded on your computer or your mobile device. And that front end gets data from the back end using the API you designed in the middle.
Let's see. I think that basically covers that question.
That was a doozy.
And the three website examples, I guess we should just pick the ones that are most relevant to what 18F is looking for.
Yeah, and again, like to your point, like up to 3 websites and open source repos. We do open source work. Like I could give them access to. I could put the app we just developed, Scan and Consent, on an open source repo and send that to them. We could put some stuff on an open source repo. It's just weird. That's such a weird requirement. Because like what we're talking, the stuff that we can open source is like our personal projects, our internal projects. And that's, I mean, it's great. They're cool stuff, but it's not really the indicative of our best work.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is the stuff that we can send along with open source as highly as our private repo stuff. So I would zip up the code and send it to them. I think that's probably going to be good. I can't imagine too many people are going to have too many open source repos to send them anyway. Next question, move on.
Yeah, I love this next question.
And then you can take it while I pop out real quick. I'll be right back. But tell us about our experience. Tell them about our experience with AngularJS and Node.js.
So my first question is, which Angular are you talking about? The way they have this written as AngularJS technically means they're asking about our experience with AngularJS 1.x. And the reason I kind of chuckle is because Angular really fell off in popularity because they had Angular 1x, and it was used by a lot of companies, a lot of big companies. I think Walmart, Apple, a lot of big companies use AngularJS 1.x. And there was some inefficiencies in AngularJS, and then Google kind of took over the project. And so the team worked on releasing Angular 2, which just completely broke AngularJS 1.x to the point where they're like, okay, we're going to almost treat these as 2 different things. Anything 1.x, we're going to call AngularJS. Anything 2.0 or greater, we're going to call Angular, just Angular. So that's why I say I assume they're talking about Angular 1.x. And we have one of our clients, Red Notebook, is using AngularJS 1.x. We had another client that was Class X Sports was using AngularJS 1.x, and I guess I should actually talk about the experience. So Red Notebook was a Ionic application, meaning it was a web app that was totally responsive to run on any device, phone, tablet, web browser, your TV, whatever. And Ionic uses AngularJS as its backend, as its backbone. And so we developed this Red Notebook app, which was basically a medical notebook, or if you will, or way beyond a medical notebook, a basically end of life notebook. And we have a whole episode where we interview the founder of Red Notebook and talk about, you know, the development of it, how it came to be. But it's basically for people to put in their most intimate, private, and financial, medical, all this very private information, so they can easily pass it along to their executor or whoever they want to give access to when they pass or when they're incapable of taking care of themselves anymore. The other one, Class X Sports, was a fantasy sports-based application where you were actually, it was a survivor type game where instead of picking teams, you pick players to reach a certain amount of sports. So this one was actually completely different from Red Notebook in where the Red Notebook AngularJS app was kind of a singular use case, one user, no interaction with other users. The Class X Survivor was very social, and players playing against each other, involving picking players, interacting with third-party APIs, REST-based APIs to populate kind of fields and things like that. So those are two good examples. We actually have a lot of older experience with AngularJS, but we have since moved most of our Angular work to React.
I was just going to say, did you talk about how these bids get locked in on a technology when it's not necessarily the best technology choice, and how hard it is to get folks to move off of that?
No, I talked about how AngularJS, I assume they're talking about AngularJS 1.x, because that's what the official team says. Anything before 2.0, we're going to call AngularJS, and anything after 2.0 or later, we're going to call Angular. And how Angular lost a lot of developers and application installs by basically breaking the world by moving from AngularJS to Angular, because they're almost two completely different frameworks. To the point where it's so comical, where there was like a satire piece because the Angular team came out and was like, all right, I think it was maybe Angular 7 they're releasing, Angular 5 or 7. They're like, all right, this is the last time we're releasing breaking changes. And everyone's kind of like laughing because they keep saying that. So, but yeah, to your point, it sounds like probably they have an existing AngularJS application and they're looking for people with experience with it. It's definitely not a problem. My suggestion would be you move to React to stay kind of more nimble. But we definitely have quite a bit of experience with AngularJS. No,
I mean, sorry, I was going to say it might be a good thing to add, just that we could help them move to or transition their app to React so that it'd be more
future-proof,
updatable. Exactly.
Future-proof. Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, go ahead with Node.
No, and Node, I mean, at this point, we don't write an app that doesn't have to do with Node. We have done everything in Node. We have done we've done IoT apps in Node where we have monitored sound levels using Node.js. We have used Node.js on IoT applications to track OBD2 devices in vehicles. All of our APIs are written in Node. Again, generally we stick with Lambda and go serverless, because I don't know why you wouldn't go serverless at this point. And actually, we publish our APIs on API Gateway that are backed by Node.js. And actually, the way we do it is we have what's called an Express proxy. And Express is the most common Node framework for HTTP requests. And Express proxy kind of sits in front of AWS Lambda and takes care of forwarding based on path information, the call to the right endpoint. Because you have to understand about Lambda is each Lambda function is separate. So this kind of is a neat way to take people who are familiar with Express and get them up and running on AWS Lambda really quickly.
Yeah, Lambda itself is a whole episode on its own. But yeah, that's a good broad overview, I guess. You basically have functionality. You separate, as opposed to having one code base with all the functionality, you separate the functionality out and deliver the request to the necessary piece of functionality and get back what you need.
Yeah,
so it's not all in one place.
That's like, I mean, and the buzzwords in our industry are monolith versus microservices. So monolith, you take like an app that does everything and you shove it together and you publish it on a server. Microservices like Lambda, each function does a very specific thing, like get me a stock quote. That's one function. That's one kind of microservice. Another microservice is purchase a stock. So they're very defined services that are separate, as opposed to just cramming everything in one monolithic code base.
Yeah, it's almost like a collection of Lambda functions well, it's not really what a code base used to be, but it's somewhat close. Yeah. It's basically like if you think of an employee who has a whole bunch of different tasks, like the tasks themselves would be Lambda functions.
Exactly.
And the employee would almost be like the express router who would decide what function he has to perform at what time.
Yep. That's a good one.
Yeah. Any more to touch on with Node? I mean, it's tough to know what level of detail they want to, because we could talk about our Node experience for like a book.
Yeah, and we kind of have. We have put together a book on our JavaScript experience. So
that's
like
a good segue to our ebook.
Yeah,
a good shout out.
Shameless promotion.
Shameless marketing.
I mean, like we say this all the time. And Node.js is really just JavaScript on the server. That's really all it is. And we say this all the time. Why would anyone not be using JavaScript at this point? Why would you use anything except for JavaScript? And except for in very niche situations, there's almost no reason you wouldn't. The asynchronous nature of it makes it very appropriate for the microservices and scalability and performance. The ubiquity of it, meaning you can write your front end and back end in it. There's just no reason you would not, at least from where we're sitting, where you would not use Node or specifically JavaScript for a project.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. Next question.
Yeah, let's do it
as well. This one's so open-ended. How do you approach different technical situations? Difficult technical situations.
Yeah, so I'm going to read this. When I heard this, I had a gut reaction to it, and you could take this in so many different directions. I'm gonna take it this way, and hopefully you have a different take on it. But basically, and again, we've talked about this in a lot of our episodes, is estimation. And estimation is really difficult in software because you come up with a lot of unknowns. Because usually when you're building custom software, you're creating something that doesn't exist. You're creating new functionality. You're basically inventing something. So how do you handle situations where you just don't know? It hasn't been done before. I'm taking that to mean as what they mean by difficult technical situations, these unknowns. So what we do at the beginning of a project, we have, here's another buzzword for you. It's called a research sprint. And it's part of agile development. And basically all a research sprint is, and okay, let me take one more step back. A sprint is usually a defined period of time. In our realm, usually it's 1 week.
Exactly, yeah. 1 or 2 weeks is the general length of an iteration. Well, sprint is synonymous with an iteration, basically.
That's right.
Iteration is another word you'll hear thrown around a ton with agile methodologies.
Yep. So basically you take 1 week and you just kind of research the heck out of everything you have. And you come up with when we do our research sprint, what we're really coming up with is a list of the unknowns, because that is going to tell us unknowns are what scare me. Unknowns are the scary part because you have no idea how long they're going to take. As I've said before, you can figure it out. We could figure out how to do anything. Given enough time and money, we could put a spaceship on the moon. But
with our phone nowadays, our phones have more computing power than their computers did back in the 60s.
But that's not how agencies want. They don't have unlimited budgets. They don't have unlimited time to work. So they need timelines. They need budgets. And so that's why unknowns scare me, because they can kind of explode.
It's the Donald Rumsfeld approach to software development.
That's right.
We have known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns. Those are the ones that really get you in software development. I guess everything else in life. But you do want a list of the known unknowns.
That's right.
You want a list of the stuff where we know we can do this because we can do pretty much anything with technology, but we don't know how we're going to do it or how long it's going to take.
And usually, by the way, well, you and I are largely the ones who put together these RFPs and RFIs. When we have the unknowns, we do that research sprint. It's like an all hands on deck thing. It's not like we just stick to the team members that are on the project. Like if there's unknowns, we get the word out there company wide, and we're like, hey, has anyone had similar experiences with this? Has anyone built anything similar to this? Because we are just looking for anything to kind of give an estimation or do some resource planning and stuff like that. So assuming that it's at that point it still stays an unknown, we bracket off quite a bit of time for that. But what we do is we kind of acknowledge to ourselves, okay, some of these unknowns we're going to be able to get through very quickly, and other ones it's just going to take us forever to get through it. And so, we kind of pride ourselves on never missing a contracted deadline. So when we put together the deadline, the timeline, we take into account those difficult technical situations or those unknowns. But once we put our stamp on it, like when we get to those unknowns, we like go at it 24/7, because all the rest of the stuff we know we can get through pretty quickly, but we want to get through these unknowns as quickly as possible. And it could happen that we get through it in 10 minutes, or it could happen that we get through it in 24 hours or 48 hours. But we're going to put all that stuff up front, and we're just going to keep going at it until we've done it. And those are the
huge blockers to timelines. And the most important thing is hitting dates and deadlines.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, that's how I took that question. I don't know if you have a different take on that question, but that's how I took it.
I actually did. I would almost say it's kind of related, but it's basically when you're, not necessarily before you start the process, but when you're actually in the process and you come across something that you didn't necessarily foresee, how do you approach it? And so I'm thinking here in terms of like, how do you rebudget time, or how do you bring more hands on deck? Or, one thing that we usually do is, if there's a hard deadline and something comes up that's going to take a week or two of development time away from features that we were going to build out, you have to make the hard choice of, well, look, we're not going to be able to get to all the features that we thought we were going to be able to. So which ones of these are expendable? Which ones can we push until after we launch? Which ones are entirely necessary to the launch of the application? And so you have to make some hard decisions there. But I think that's one approach to, I guess, the unknown situation as far as difficult technical situations go.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that a little bit, because government makes that a little bit more difficult than the commercial world, because they want, generally for any project, they want to know who specifically is going to be doing what on the project. And that's not our wheelhouse. Our wheelhouse is to have a core team on every project, but to bring people in during the project based on their specialization. So if we encounter an unknown and we have someone on our team who may have, or it's like we sent out that email, has anyone had experience with this unknown? And someone's like, yeah, I am. That person may be working on another project, but we're going to try to get him on the project to work on the unknown. And so in the government world, you got to kind of have to get approval. Hey, we've hit this roadblock and we can figure this out with the team we have right now, but we have another guy on our team that's working on another project. He's already done this. So can we bring him in? And it's not going to cost you anymore, but we just want to let you know we're going to be bringing in a non-core member to tackle this problem because he or she has experience with it. The other thing, and it kind of bleeds in my opinion, into this next question, is we, in terms of onboarding other team members, and we mentioned this in our last episode, and they're kind of bleeding together for me. So if it was actually this episode.
Well, yeah, here let me actually let me put the next question there because I know where you're going with this. And actually, we should trademark the Donald Rumsfeld software development methodology.
That and the bomber's peak.
Next question is, what helps your team adhere to good coding practices? So I think you were basically going in this direction as far as being able to bring all hands on deck. You need to have some sort of stable, repeatable methodology where people can just slide in wherever they need to.
Yeah, you read my mind. So number one is clean self-documenting code. That is the most important aspect of adhering to good coding practices. But as we mentioned, and as you were alluding to, our developers, they're actually recording and talking out loud as they write code. We have, I don't know, hundreds of hours of just screen sharing sessions where people are pair programming or they're just working by themselves and they're just writing code and they're explaining it. And so that helps so much when it comes time to code reviews, because you can just watch the coding session. And our developers work long hours and they work hard hours and they're very good. And we do the same thing. But sometimes we're not thinking clearly, and so our code reflects that. And you might not know it by looking at the code, but if you're hearing the person's thought process as they are writing the code, you're like, okay, whoa. I know the code that this person is going to write is not going to be optimal because they're not thinking optimally. So that really assures good coding practices, and also helps onboard anyone else into the project, because that includes not just coding, but the work to set up the project and share the project and get other people set up on it. The last thing that is kind of a side effect of using AWS and API Gateway in respect to API design, is if you use API Gateway correctly, it self-creates Swagger documentation, which is really, really useful for consuming and publishing APIs.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you can talk about our development stack too, as far as even like down to the coding standards, like as far as spacing and naming conventions and stuff like that. Like we've locked everything down to the point where any of our developers can jump into any code base and basically be able to situate themselves immediately.
That's right. We use ESLint to make sure that our JavaScript, our JSLint, so our JavaScript is conforming to best practices. We have standard, tabs or spaces versus tabs, how many indents. We have automated test runners. Our stack is standardized from the top to the bottom when it comes to that, just for that purpose. I mean, in the beginning, we used to take on kind of projects from all walks of life, from Java to Python to Ruby, and we can still we still have the ability to do all that work, but our focus on JavaScript has allowed us to standardize and make sure that our coding is like the best JavaScript coding it possibly can be, because that's what we are focused on. We're not taking a .NET job. We don't need the money. We would much rather do good work than just do any work. And so you're right in the fact that our standardized stack, which is a JavaScript stack, is going to almost ensure that we have good outputs in terms of coding.
We actually already talked about this next question. What is your experience with human-centered design? I don't know if we need to add much else there beyond. Well, actually, maybe just a review of what we talked about earlier.
Well, I don't know if we need to review it so much, but I will say something that I thought about with one of the things you have to look out for with human-centered design, and I touched on it. It's not a dictatorship; it's more collaborative. But you don't want it to be a democracy. You don't want it to be a pure democracy, because then nothing will get done. Like, you want collaboration and feedback, and you want to make decisions based on that feedback, but you have to have that person in the role that says, all right, we've got the feedback, we've got the qualitative feedback, we got the quantitative feedback. There's difference in opinion on what we should do. We've heard it all. We're just going to go forward with this direction. And then if that proves to be a bad decision, we're going to change it later, because you cannot get hung up on collaboration forever.
Yeah, I mean that's a key component of any agile methodologies. You need one final voice. You need some sort of project manager or some leadership role, because we've been on so many projects where there's been too many cooks in the kitchen, and everyone has the best idea, and you just get stuck. You're just turning your wheels on all this stuff, and you actually end up getting nowhere. So
Right.
you have to have somebody who can put their foot down and say, this is a great idea, but we're not going to build it right now.
Yeah.
We
And
have
the
to
other,
push it down the line.
yeah. And one more thing on that topic, I also think that you have to be careful on not creating when you're using human-centered design, not creating a Frankenstein approach. Like taking pieces, like you said, everyone's got the best idea. And sometimes that project manager or the person in charge tries to take pieces of the best ideas and create a democratic best idea based on that, which usually never works. Usually you just have to say, we're going to go, Bob's idea sounds the best right now. We're going to go with Bob's idea. We're going to measure it. And if it doesn't work, we'll consider these other opinions, but we're going to go with Bob's solution here, kind of thing.
Actually, I wasn't expecting questions. So we have a question, which is, what are the other ways the projects are managed? And I think that probably still the number one other methodology for managing a project is something called the waterfall, which is basically agile is you have short time frames where you're building stuff out so that you can keep up on updates to the project. It's a lot like what we talked about with human-centered design. Is you're constantly getting feedback. You're constantly iterating over the application to make sure that it's the most functional it can be for its users. Whereas waterfall is much more, it's all up front. You basically have a fully realized idea, and you know exactly what you're going to build. You know every component that needs to be built out, and you can schedule it out over the entire life cycle of the project until you get exactly what you mapped out. So it's much less iterative, and it's much more upfront decision making. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And again, usually there's no room for human-centered design in waterfall because you're adhering to, like you said, a strict timeline where you're just going to keep going. You have a Gantt chart, and that Gantt chart says what you're going to do every week through the completion of the project. Where with human-centered design, like kind of you touched on, if in week one you're not happy with the results, you spend week two making the team happy with the results from week one, kind of thing.
And not to rip on waterfall too, because it does have its uses. I think, especially with government stuff, I don't entirely buy this argument, but you can at least sort of figure out what the budget should be for the project. If you know all the components that need to be built, how long they're going to take, how many developers, you can get a much. See, I'm saying this, but I don't necessarily believe it. Theoretically, you can get a more refined budget. The issue is what you build isn't necessarily going to be exactly what you want or exactly what you need. So there are going to be future costs down the line. It's just you're sort of pushing off that decision until after you complete the first version of the project. And then you're going to make the tough choices about how much more you want to spend, as opposed to deciding how you want to budget stuff as you're moving along and having a more refined product that's closer to your ideal on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and pure agile is, I have seen pure agile very few times as a possibility in these government bids, because they want a price. If you're
and they have to have a price,
right?
They can't just get more money.
Right. They have to have a price. So that by itself is not pure agile. Pure agile will be like, we don't know. We're going to be done when we're done. And here is our monthly cost. And we're going to iterate on this project until you're happy with it. That's pure agile, which we do have clients, not in the government realm, that are pure agile. And by the way, they're usually happier with that arrangement than they are with like kind of us nickel and diming them every single time they want a quote on a project.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great setup for entrepreneurs and small businesses, because you can basically, you're not sure what your budget's going to be for your app as you're building it out. You might have a month where funds are tight, and it's like, we're just not going to build as much stuff into the app this month. And then you might have a windfall one month, and it's like, this big idea we've had that we've been putting off for forever, let's go ahead and build it.
Yeah, exactly.
Next question is, Actually, kind of interesting. Describe how user research had a major impact on a specific project's
Well,
outcomes.
I guess I can give an example, and then you can give an example. So we'll talk about Class Act Survivor, which I talked about in conjunction with Angular. And so we at the beginning of the project, or not at the beginning, but at the first release, we're just seeing data-wise, we're seeing very little usage. We had a lot of signups. We had a lot of people signing up for the application, but not a lot of people using the application, like actually making picks and things like that. So we dug into the numbers. We were using Google Analytics, and we were seeing that people just actually couldn't figure out how to make a pick. Like they thought they were actually making a pick, but it wasn't actually being saved. And so from that research, we realized we had to say, like, when people like are walking away or transitioning screens, we had to be like, hey, you haven't saved your picks yet. Click this button to save your picks. And after that, like, usage went through the roof. And it was just a matter of kind of letting these users know, hey, you haven't saved your picks yet. So that was, they're just asking for, they said a major impact on a specific project's outcome. So that was that one that, I was involved in that one. I don't think you were involved with that project, but that was kind of the biggest one that comes to mind when I think of that question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton to talk about, but one that comes to mind for me is Qualys. Qualys is a DME management company for hospice, and we've been working with them for, gosh, I think it's 7 years now. It might be 6 or 7 years. But at the very start of the project, one thing that we did was we sat down with the employees at Qualys, and we watched them go through their entire process of what they do is, they will bill for everything all at once in the middle of the month and at the end of the month. And then you have to go through all of the line items that are billed in a given month or in a given 2-week piece of a month and figure out what needs to be discounted, what needs to not be paid, what needs to be credited back to Qualys, all these different billing decisions. And so it was actually a really interesting procedure to watch them go through this process, because you can see it's like, I click here, and then I click here, and then I click here, and then I go to this page, and I look at this thing, and then I click here, and then I go back to this page, and then I download this, and then it's like 20 steps, and it's like, well, wouldn't it be nice if you could just click on this one thing and then do it all from that one spot? And they're like, oh my God, that would save me so much time. And so what's incredible is when we started with Qualys, it would take them half a month to do their reconciliation process. And so we've gotten that down to where it's now 2 or 3 days to completely reconcile all the invoices from an entire month-long series of invoices. So that's obviously a huge gain for them, and it's allowed them to scale up incredibly without having to increase headcount tremendously. So everyone's working more efficiently, and it's obviously saved them a lot of time and money. So that's, I think, one good example where user research had a major impact.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples, but that was definitely the one that stands out for me, just because it was so dramatic in the from like almost no usage to just astronomical usage.
Let's see. We got, when does user research happen on your projects? And I guess using Qualys as an example, it happens both upfront and on an ongoing basis. Because upfront, you want to know where the pain points are for users. I guess Qualys is interesting because there was an existing application that you could actually do user research on. I think with something that you're building from scratch, it's going to be much more so on an ongoing basis, getting feedback on the app you're building out.
Yeah, I mean, and so kind of our general ongoing premise with user research is we're on a constant release cycle for almost all of our projects. So we're releasing new code into production at the end of every sprint, which again is usually a week or 2 weeks. So every week or 2 weeks, we're pushing new code into production, assuming there's a live application. So generally what we do is we have other environments. We'll have like a staging environment where there's an internal copy of the application running so the stakeholders can use it. So our general kind of MO is to have a sprint where we're writing new features. And at the end of the sprint, we're deploying those features to staging. And then when we're writing new code for the next staging, in parallel, the stakeholders, the project managers are user testing and giving feedback, collecting feedback on those staging changes that we made. And then at the end of the next sprint, we look at the feedback and the bug reports and things like that, and we decide which features we want to take from staging to production, and push those out kind of in a pipeline. Now, at the same time, we have to collect feedback from what's actually in production from our live end users. So that goes into it as well and helps us kind of set the agenda for our IPM, or the iteration planning meeting, which happens at the end of every sprint. So we look at it and we'll say, okay, here's the feedback we have from internal testers and users on the new features on staging. And here's the feedback, qualitative and quantitative, from our end users on production. And we kind of use that feedback every week to set the agenda for the upcoming sprint. We may say, hey, Bob, we know you want to get this new feature. We know you want us to get started working on this new feature, but based on the feedback from last iteration, we don't think that last feature is ready for prime time yet. We've had a lot of people that don't understand it, so we think we need to refine that more before we jump on this next feature. And Bob may just say, ignore the feedback, put it out there. Or he may say, that's great, I appreciate that. Yes, let's hold off on doing this new feature and refine the existing feature before we move on to that next one.
And that this actually brings me back to what helps your team adhere to good coding practices. Something we didn't touch on is source control, and how we use Git. And we use Git in a way where Git is, so I guess to give a broad overview of source control. So if I'm working
good luck with this one, man, especially Git.
If I'm working on my local machine and I'm making changes to code, and Cody's over there working on his local machine and he's making changes to code, there's a good chance that we might be working on the same piece of code and changing stuff in a way where it's hard to combine the two files into one on the remote location where the actual application is running from. It's kind of a shaky overview of source control. But basically, what we're trying to accomplish is we should both be able to work at the same time and have our changes both be able to be pushed up to the application without any major hassles. And so something that we do with Git is you have these things called branches. So you can pull down a separate branch of your code base and work on that and be able to merge it in with whatever the live version of the code base is, to make sure that you're not breaking anything and to get all of the changes that have been made while you're working on it, while you're working on your local branch, so that you can integrate that before you push it back up. And so as far as working on features goes, or fixing bugs or anything like that, what we do is we have a pretty elaborate Git scheme as far as creating new branches for everything that we build, so that everyone can be working on something totally different, and we're not going to screw the repository up when we push everything back up. And I don't know if we need to go into more detail on how we actually do that, or if that's just going to confuse people with this RFI. As far as like naming branches and development branches and feature and bug fix branches and topic branches. That's actually another thing too, is we have a ticketing system that allows us to track all this stuff.
And and each branch lines up with a ticket. And I mean, we could spend 3 hours talking about that.
But needless to say, like we have a way for people to work, our developers to work efficiently on a slew of different issues at once, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way to say it is kind of our tickets get assigned to developers. Developers create a new branch based on that ticket. They work. And when they're done with that ticket, they merge their topic branch, which coincides with the ticket, into the working branch, which is usually staging, which then gets deployed to staging at the end of the iteration. Like I said, we then take feedback on staging, and anything that we are ready to move from staging to production, we take those topic branches again and merge those into the production branch, which is usually the master branch for us, and then push the master branch up to production.
With the added ability of, if there's a mission critical bug on production,
that's right.
So something's totally broken, you can pull the master branch down, fix it on master branch, or you can pull the, you pull the master branch down, you create a hot fix branch, work on that branch and merge it back into master and push it up live on production, sort of skipping the entire staging branch entirely, if need be.
That's right.
And actually, talking about our ticketing system kind of relates to the next question, which is how do you make user research findings actionable?
Yeah, and I think I kind of jumped ahead I didn't read ahead to this question, but I think I kind of answered that, because we're basically, like I said, every iteration we're collecting user feedback or user research from multiple sides, both the new features on staging and the existing features that are on production. And we're using that to set the agenda for our upcoming development cycle or iteration. So that's how we make it actionable, is we discuss the feedback, qualitative, quantitative, and how that feedback will affect our development cycle. Meaning, are we going to move ahead and move into a different new feature that we have to get through, or are we going to change the existing features based on the feedback that we have?
I think that we've actually covered that question pretty much. So I'm going to move on to the last one. If you,
yeah.
And as a jack of some trades shop, TM, we need to trademark that too. This question is actually interesting. It says, describe the interaction among researchers, designers, and software developers at your firm, which is basically describing all of us at once.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because, and again, I take designers to mean more UI designers than graphic designers. Definitely would need more clarification on the word designers. Graphic designers are the people who make pretty graphics, like almost like artists. Those are graphic artists. UI designers are the folks that actually design the user interface. They're not. They'll choose a color palette, and they'll choose the layout of the site and how it responds to different sizes, like a desktop versus a mobile device versus a tablet, things like that. Researchers, for the most part, all our software developers are double as researchers, and so is our project managers. They have to be able to know how to look at data and glean feedback from data. And again, most of them are capable of doing a focus group or watching a focus group and seeing how they're interacting with the application itself and making decisions based on that. So having a dedicated researcher on our team is nothing we've ever done before, because we take like a collaborative approach to research.
The only instance I can think there is where there is some really specific domain knowledge that would take us, like I'm thinking specifically here about something like HIPAA violations. So there's a really specific piece of domain knowledge there that we could research and figure out ourselves, but it's probably best interest and to sort of bring somebody on who can help us out there. And so then I would say the interaction among that research that we bring on and us is basically us formulating good questions. I mean, like you talked about earlier, one of the key components of being a good software developer is knowing the right questions to ask. So basically having a battery of questions to ask the researcher, and then compiling their feedback in such a way that we can use that information to move forward, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Same thing with we're AWS certified in like security. However, sometimes we'll hire in cases of high sensitivity data, we'll hire like a third-party auditor.
That's exactly right, yeah.
To do like a security analysis. And again, I think that's a different type of research than what they're talking about here. But again, then we are actually bringing on dedicated researchers to make suggestions and things like that.
Well, that's the last question.
Yeah. So now you got to go over to their GitHub repository. And we got to read their draft RFP and offer feedback on that.
Guess I could should I just share a link to it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I'll share a link in all the chats too. So people watching live, you guys can click the link and follow along with us. And soon enough, we're going to have amazing green screen technology. We'll be able to screen share and have our lovely faces on screen at the same time. Just track your email down real quick. E-permit scale up, yeah?
Yep, it's draft-rfp.md.
Yep. Actually, do you want to follow? You want to go through on your end too?
Yeah,
I'm not gonna be able to share the document.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it out loud, or you want me to just?
Well, yeah, actually, you don't have to read the whole thing because it's probably 15 minutes long. But just go through the sections, and I'll post the link in chat, and people in chat just open the link up, and you can follow along with us as we talk through this.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read. I'm going to read section 1.0, and then we can discuss it. Then we can go to 2.0. I guess is the best way to do it.
Yeah, that sounds good. You did mention dead air at the front.
But yes, just I did mention that.
So people aren't worried that we're frozen. Cody's, this is dead air. This is what we call dead air.
So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, to summarize it, they want to add the ability for the public to apply and purchase permits online. I mean, that's the purpose of this application, is what I'm gathering.
And it's pasting these in chat real quick, and then I'll catch up.
And it's a very standard. It's a very standard type of request, meaning that this is a big use for technology, is cutting out the middleman. They want to free up their staff to be able to do other things than talk to consumers, where a consumer or a customer or the public can very easily fill out a form and save the administrators, the employees, the government employees, countless hours by answering the same question over and over and over again. So this is a form of automation that we see all the time. I'm going to move on.
Sorry, this is actually a question from Victor. I'm not going to try and pronounce that last name. But he wants to know how you find stuff like this, and is it public?
So it is public. We have a GSA schedule something contract. I can't remember what. We have a GSA contract, and so we get sent these things from the federal level all the time. I mean, we probably get emailed, I don't know, 10 a day, and maybe a couple a week are within our wheelhouse. So we get emailed a bunch of them, and we sift through them. You can also go to various federal government contract sites and search for these as well. It is all public, and each state has its own way of putting out RFPs, RFQs, and RFIs, and a different way for finding the state ones is a little bit more tricky. They're all public, but finding them is a little bit more of a challenge because they're not all centrally located. Now I'm kind of going on to 2.0 now.
Yep.
Actually, I wanted to back up to 1.0 because they're looking for feedback on this. So one thing that wasn't clear as I'm looking through this, the enhancements will drive increased customer satisfaction and quality of public engagement. That's a bit nebulous to me. How will that be measured?
Yeah, it's a tough one to measure. Yeah.
Yeah, like I would be looking for what specifically is going to tell, because
how are they currently measuring that, if they are at all?
That's exactly right. Like, I mean, because I always want to know if we did our job well. And really, like, our job is done well if we meet the goal. And so I'm not sure how they would measure that goal, whether it's customer satisfaction surveys, number of permits approved. You know, what indicators are we using to determine if we've met that goal? The other thing that is kind of vague to me is the application will broaden and increase the public's responsible access to public lands through online availability. So that first statement's before the semicolon. How is this going to help responsible access? Just by making it easier for them, because it's not responsible to access the land without a permit. So it's making it easier for them to get a permit and thus be responsible. I think that's what they're saying, but I'm not sure. And then
I think the phrase "through online availability" applies to the responsible component. So that I would have the same reading you do, which is basically people would have to know whether a piece of land was available before using it.
Right.
But I guess be their definition of responsible usage.
Right. Then that after the semicolon, a predictable, responsive, and friendly experience. I imagine they're saying that they want this to be a responsive design. So I'm imagining this is a web app that they want built. But I would want that clarified, because that could also mean a native application that works on iPads and phones.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's really
so that I would clarify that. The task order seeks to expand the capabilities of the platform by ensuring that the product can better support these initial forests and allow for the onboarding of additional high priority forests identified by the U.S. Forest Service. Okay, so what they're saying is that at launch, only some forests are going to be included. I think that's what they're saying. Only some forests are going to be included in this online permitting process. And then the app needs to be expandable to allow more forests to be entered into this process at a later date.
Yeah, which I think probably relates to reduced administrative burden. That's right. A little bit higher up on the page.
Which again, we've got a little while to go through this, but that definitely means that they're going to have a admin panel that needs to be built as well if they're going to be adding stuff in there. All right, now going on to statement of objectives. So, okay, they're using the word sprints, by the way. So obviously they're looking for agile. They're talking about what we talked in the survey, how they say they want to be able to reprioritize stories, which are just features. They want to be able to reprioritize features based on feedback, which is...
And I guess the product owner, which they mentioned, would be the U.S. Forest Service.
Yeah.
I guess so that would be representatives from that team. We'd have to know what that team would look like.
Yep, exactly. That's a good point. How many people will be represented by the U.S. Forestry Service, or U.S. Forest Service, rather?
Yeah, and what the interaction is going to be there, what their availability is going to be like, and stuff like that.
Yep. Also, it's good to know if they have a preferred sprint length. That's good to know too.
Existing online permitting platform. So they have a solution.
Yeah, the vendor must build a custom software.
They have maybe this is why they asked. They have, it looks like an open source solution.
And that set, by the way, they need to fix that sentence up a little bit. Okay, and they're
extending. Yeah,
they're using Docker, which actually makes onboarding a lot easier. So that's good. That makes setup much easier.
There's a Christmas trees forest database. It's interesting.
Okay.
National Forest Christmas tree sites. That's apparently a thing. Who knew?
They need to fix that sentence. The vendor must build a custom software, extend the existing online permitting. Okay, Epics. Which do
you think Clark Griswold is a test user in their database?
I hope so.
If I was building this application, it would be. All right, so you're on to Epics now?
Yeah. Have you ever referred this? This is what I mean. Like epics. I think this is a new one on me. Basically, this is new features they want.
Yeah, is that a term from? Is that a Scrum term?
Like Scrum or Extreme? I don't know. I don't know.
Stories versus themes versus epics. Oh, an epic is made up of multiple stories.
So it's like the Odyssey.
Yes. It's like a Quentin Tarantino movie. Um, but they may also resemble stories in the sense that at first many appear to simply be a big story.
See, this
So
is what I mean. Like, and all these are features. All of these are features.
yeah,
Some of them need to be broken down into smaller features, but they're just features.
but epic sounds so cool.
Epic sounds amazing.
The modern epic.
I mean, this is okay. Now I'm on to additional requirements because I didn't find anything that other than the use of epics is kind of off-putting.
I
Okay,
mean, improved user experience could be maybe a little more defined.
true.
If they have, they must already have explicit things that they have in mind there.
2 week sprints. There you go. All right, so they answered my question. 2 week sprints. And they're going to be reviewed by QUASP.
CASP,
QUASP.
Quality Assurance Surveillance Plan. CASP. The vendor and government may mutually agree to alter sprint length as needed. You got to sign an NDA.
Well, it's funny that we have to sign an NDA now because we've already kind of gotten.
Yeah, we can take the money and run at this point.
Um,
You have to sign an NDA for, I mean, it's an open source project.
yeah.
I'm not sure what you're signing an NDA for. I guess maybe that would be like, although isn't all the data public? I was thinking it might be private data, or like you'd know which forests were coming online when.
Oh yeah.
You could invest in Christmas tree companies when there's new forests coming online. Are you on the 2.2?
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
cloud.gov staging environment?
Yep. Yep.
So
I'm looking at that now.
cloud.gov is.
By the way, it looks like they're using TypeScript and they're using Angular 5. So
Oh,
actually,
cloud.gov is just AWS.
yeah, but it's just like wrapped in. Yeah, it's just AWS, but it's like a wrap around AWS pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
So I do like the fact that they're using Angular as opposed to Angular JS, but that's something they need to
They need to
clarify.
change that, yeah, into
Angular JS specifically refers to Angular 1X. Yeah.
use Slack for human collaboration,
Okay. Yeah.
like everyone does now.
One thing. Okay. This might.
So they're just looking for feedback on this bid as far as what should be clarified before they
that's right.
release the RFP, like
Yep.
what's confusing people.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Okay, good. I mean, they are answering a lot of the questions that I usually have when we get RFPs. Like, do we have to meet in person?
Yeah.
A lot of this stuff is being answered. So this is pretty good RFP compared to a lot of the ones we see. Okay, so daily stand up via Google Hangouts, which we're using right now. And by the way, a stand up is just like what is it? You stay every developer. It's developers only. Developers are the only ones who speak at a stand up, and they say
It's
what
10
they did.
minutes of your best routine.
What's that?
10 minutes of your best routine. And you see how many laughs you can get.
That's right. That's right. And like, yeah, it's kind of like every person has a scene and they act it out. And but like each developer will say what they did yesterday, what they're going to do today, and what, if anything, they're blocked on.
Exactly. That's it. Those three. And it's a stand-up because it shouldn't take more than, I think 10 minutes is usually what they say, right?
Right.
So you're standing up. Because if it starts taking too long, then people's legs start getting tired. And then you realize the stand-up's gone on for too long. I think it's the original reason it was a stand-up.
Yes.
And we actually used to physically stand up at ESPN, even though we did it over the phone. Everyone would stand up.
We did. 2.6 and 2.7 are very, very standard. I'm down at 3.0 now.
Yeah, everything in front of me too. I guess here they'll get into specifics of what the actual like user enhancements are and stuff like that.
This is really cool that they do want to keep it open source. I mean, that's cool. I like that.
Good on you, National Forest Service.
Okay, so they want documentation in the actual repo that said that about discovered usability issues, which that's fine. When we do that, we usually have like a docs folder inside the repo, and we'll put we'll kind of put you don't want to put like a Word doc in there because then it's like it can't be version controlled.
Yeah, you can just use. I mean, they're clearly using Markdown already, so
right, exactly. See, okay, here's something that I have a problem with.
Okay, talk to our audience about that problem, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, design deliverables, mockups and or design files, if applicable, or design changes reflected in the development product. Now, a mockup, again, it needs to be clear what a mockup is, because sometimes a mockup is like a Photoshop file where it's a static document that shows how something looks. And sometimes it's actual live HTML that can work on a screen, but isn't receiving live data. If you're agile, you should be able to put design changes directly into the product. And what I mean by that is, especially when you're developing a responsive application or site, if you're doing that as a static document, you are having to develop or produce like 8 different versions of the same design, just at different sizes. And then if you take it the other way and you're like, okay, well, we'll just do the mockup in HTML without any real data, and that'll show the responsiveness. That's no more difficult than just doing it with live data. So I would clarify that on what they actually mean by that, because usually it's just quicker to make the design changes in the actual app on a different branch, on a topic branch or the staging branch, and get feedback based on that.
All right, what number are you on now?
I'm on 4 now, onto the required skill and knowledge.
Might ask if they require any sort of Scrum certifications for the actual project
Right.
managers.
And the login authentication services, that's a big one too. Because we want to know what services they want. Like that's nebulous to me. Which ones are they actually wanting? Like, do they want Facebook login? I mean, do they want Google login? I mean, usually we would use Cognito in a situation like this, which makes it very easy to implement all of them. But I would be specific on what services they want there.
And for cloud deployment, I think you have to use cloud.gov. So I'm not sure why they would
Right.
put cloud deployment in as a separate bullet point.
I guess
It's
just
kind of confusing whether you can use your own, whether we could put it directly on AWS or whether we'd have to use cloud.gov. I would just want some clarification there.
yeah. Well, and I guess they're saying this is the required skills and knowledge section. So you have to have knowledge of cloud deployment. And again, knowledge of these login services too. But I mean, there's so many, and they're widely different. I mean, of course, you may have experience with Facebook login, but they want GitHub login. So I would be a little bit more specific there.
So I guess are they asking whether you have experience using cloud deployment for hosting demonstrations specifically? Which I guess is fine.
Yeah, yeah.
Slightly confusing.
So here's another one under using human-centered design, sketching, wireframing, and prototyping, and user flow development. What's the difference between sketching and wireframing? Is because usually we use like programs like Balsamiq to do wireframes, and to me, a sketch is just a wireframe but done on or like pencil and paper. Do they actually want like I don't know anyone really does that anymore because the tools are so good that you could just sketch something in a wireframe environment.
It's a fair question though, because I mean, methodologies like XP still use note cards explicitly. Like that's part of the actual project management system. So they might actually want pen and paper sketches. So that would be a good point of clarification. Or the ability to send in pen and paper sketches and convert them to wireframes.
True. And then on key personnel. So they want
they do want a Scrum Master.
Scrum Master, senior full stack developer. And again, I would change AngularJS because they're using TypeScript. I would mention they're using TypeScript and that it's Angular, not AngularJS. User researcher, which in our case would be another software developer. We would have a senior full stack developer, which in this case we would. And now again, I see they have agile labor categories up here. That's fine. Everyone defines these differently. But in our case, the Scrum Master would be like a project manager. The senior full stack developer would be like the lead developer. And then you'd have a non-lead, whether it's a senior or junior developer or engineer, take on the responsibility of a user researcher who would conduct all of these things and also help the lead developer. That's how I would staff this. But again, it just kind of everyone, there's like 5,000 different terminologies used for like developer. And my point is, it's good that they actually link you to the labor category so it explains what each one does. Because
I'm actually looking at user researcher now, but they call it interaction designer too. But to your point, this is largely what our developers do anyway. So
right.
It'd be a user researcher name only.
See, and this is what I was talking about in the prior section. In the event a key personnel member will be substituted, the contractor shall provide complete resumes for proposed substitutes and any additional information requested by the contracting officer no later than 5 business days after notifying the government of the need for a substitution. So we were talking about augmentation, not necessarily substitution, but it's difficult to augment a team as needed on government projects sometimes. So technical quotes will be submitted by Google Form. That's actually, I really like that.
And they use GitHub issues for the RFQ.
Yep. Yep.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. This is always tough. I'm looking at 5.1.1.1. Offers should describe their understanding of the performance objectives for the requirements described in full in section 2.
Yeah, it's like how much detail do you go into?
That's exactly right. Like, I wish they would give an example, because
just give a word count. If you give a word count, just any sort of limit.
That would be huge. And like an assumption, and assume no technical knowledge, or assume a familiarity with Node, like something. It always drives me nuts because I don't know. Some RFPs require very technical details, and some don't want that at all. Also, do you know what it says? They must provide a justification of the proposed labor categories and skill mix. I don't know what that means.
How that would help achieve the module objectives of scaling the application to more forests.
That would be something that I would read in the RFP, and I would during Q&A, I would submit, like, what does this mean? Can you give me an example? Because I don't know what that means.
That might be, as users, covering all your bases as far as who's actually going to be using the app and finding appropriate test users from each demographic to use the application and give you feedback. So if you have people who are actually in the forest industry using it, they're probably going to know more and have an easier time than, somebody who has no interaction with forests on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
Maybe.
So I guess
my understanding of it.
Our feedback would be to clarify that. See, this is what I don't understand. Each proposed team member's resume should include the following. All that makes sense. But then for technical architects, back-end developers, front-end developers, and user research, a link to the person's GitHub repository. For what purpose? I have nothing on my GitHub repository. Everything I publish privately under the GitHub, our Gunner Technology repo.
Yeah, I think they're probably just trying to snag those individual developers. I think I would talk to when the won the bid solo.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's less appropriate for companies that are bidding that.
Yeah, it makes no sense. So my feedback would be remove that entirely. I just don't know how many companies are going to have their employees have personal repos where they're actually publishing worthwhile things under. Like, if I'm going to find a job as a developer, I will put stuff on my GitHub repository, because I'm sure they're going to ask to see that if I'm applying for a position as an individual.
Yep.
For writers, content strategists, and designers, a writing sample and/or usability research artifact. So, but that seems like it's cookie cutter, because nothing in here suggested any writer or content strategist.
Yeah, that might just be copy paste.
Yeah.
From a different RFI or RFP.
And I know it saves time in RFPs, the copy and paste stuff, but it makes it really confusing for the people reading, because then it's like, wait a minute, did we miss something?
Well, they might actually fold writing under human-centered design, because they say human-centered design practices include, and one of the bullet points is content design and copywriting. So they might be expecting some sort of writing expertise from the senior web developer?
Maybe. My point is it's not clear at all.
Yeah, no, it's not.
And actually, even if you go back up a step, technical architects, back-end developers, and front-end developers, and user researchers. So the only one of those four that was explicitly mentioned as the roles needed was user researcher.
Yeah,
They said a
exactly.
full stack developer,
Right,
and then they
exactly.
mentioned. So that needs to be clarified as well.
Yeah, this is some copy pasta stuff. Just as an aside, resumes that aren't one page are the worst. If you send a resume that's like a page and a quarter, that's such a pet peeve of mine. Like, fit it on one page, which
Oh
they
yeah,
explicitly ask for. They say all resumes should be one
yeah,
page.
yeah. That's really good. Code repository submitted must meet the following requirements.
Oh, they do mention credentialed repositories. So I guess ask permission to share a repo with the National Forest Service from existing clients
Yeah,
would be an
which is
option.
this is yeah, but this is even this I don't understand what they're
I mean, I understand now why they're asking about open source repos and examples of
right
open
right
source
right right.
repos that, or websites that use open source repos. But this is a, you don't come across this too often.
No, no. It says okay if
They
not
can
publicly
cover.
available, demonstrate security practices that are appropriate for source control release.
Did you see the part about they can cover performance periods of no more than 18 months?
Yeah,
I'm not really sure what that means.
I don't know what that
If
means
you have a
either.
longer term project, you can't submit that. That seems like an arbitrary
Yeah, and I'm not even sure
restriction.
what they even mean by that.
Maybe because they wouldn't be relevant to this project because it's shorter term.
I guess so.
That's all I can think of.
They are asking for a lot in these repos. Design artifacts, results of user research.
Hmm. Yeah, roughly similar in size in terms of size, scope, and complexity.
Yeah.
I guess that makes sense.
Verbal presentation. Makes sense.
Where are you looking at?
I'm down on 5.3. Didn't like that one.
It's a fireball.
No, that's the other one. That's caption.
Okay.
Technical will significantly outweigh price. That's good to know. I would almost make that break that out better since it's not kind of hidden. Six-month base period and a 3-month option period.
Oh, there you go.
I mean, 6 months is a lot of time on this project. You could pretty much redo it in 6 months. I mean, you could definitely redo it in 6 months.
Oh, there's the points of contact.
Yep. This is, like I said, it's a really detailed RFP. And they break the epics down into user stories.
Huh.
Interesting. So yeah, 6 months. 6 months is a.
Well, what's the user research going to be beyond these existing stories? It seems like they've already done the work of the user researcher.
Yeah, I guess more stuff could be born out of this, I guess, as they move forward.
So, yeah.
Would you stop it?
Is somebody at the door?
No, he's what does it say?
Oh, there you go. Additional epics and stories will result from onboarding new forests, user research, ability tests, and feedback from real end users once the system is in production. So I guess this isn't in production yet. Or maybe they mean the new version isn't in production.
It's just weird because if I were bidding on this, and again, we're not bidding on, we may end up bidding on this, but we're not bidding on this right now. I would pull down this project and I would knock out some of these user stories. I mean, it's public, it's open source. And I don't understand, maybe legally they're not allowed to, but like, why isn't that the criteria for acceptance? Being like, we have these user stories, pick some that you think you can do, and we'll evaluate the winner based on the best solution to the ones that were picked, kind of thing. Like, it seems like this is the perfect project to pick the winner based on price. Obviously, price has to be factored in, and their ability to do the work that is already known.
Yeah, exactly. If ever there was a time to just say, like, show us your code, like, show us what you got.
Right.
Yeah, this will be it.
Cool. Well, I think that will do it for a very long pop-up episode, but I think it was definitely beneficial for me to go over it like that with you live, kind of like do what we do normally, but in a live setting, because I think it forces us to explain things that we would normally take for granted.
Exactly.
So
yeah, no, this has been great. Yeah, and all of our viewers who stuck with us for that whole thing, you guys are champs.
We'll get this over to our procurement team and have them wade through our interview and make us sound good and submit the RFI for us.
Somebody in chat said this reminds me of the old days of NASA on live TV. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll catch you later.